So we're recording now.
Okay. Yay!
Okay. So, and I can also cut, edit and things, but I probably won't.
Okay.
So.
All right.
So Maria, we can always start off an interview with you telling everybody about you. So just go ahead and introduce yourself. I've kind of given brief introductions and kind of framed the conversation in previous lectures and whatnot. But I'll let you go ahead and talk about who you are and kind of give the Cliff Note version of your career.
Okay. Hey, Martin, am I looking at you or am I looking down? Am I looking at you? That's okay? Just straight on?
Yeah, straight into the camera or your computer's camera. Whatever.
Okay, so my name is Maria Carrillo. I am the Assistant Managing Editor for Enterprise at the Tampa Bay Times. And before that, I was a Senior Editor in charge of Enterprise at the Houston Chronicle. Before that, I was the Managing Editor at the Virginian Pilot after also being a DME there and working my way from smaller papers where I'd been an editor and started my career as a reporter many years ago.
Okay. So how much of that time have you been a manager or a leader? And I think you kind of framed you kind of talk about leadership more than management, I think.
Yes. I became an editor back in actually 1993. So after I'd been a reporter for about 7 years, got promoted because I complained too much about my editors, and my boss at the time decided that, kind of put it at me like, if you can do it better, then let's see it. And got absolutely no training to be an editor. And like you and I have talked about, Martin, on a Friday I was a reporter. On a Monday I started being an editor. Didn't really see myself as a newsroom leader so much as I was patching and fixing stories. And so over time, of course, have evolved my thinking into what this role is supposed to be. And of course, as my role grew bigger in different iterations, have tried to see it as, so little of what I do is actually the hands-on, on a keyboard. And so much of what I do is in the conversation, is in guiding people and setting a vision and trying to get everybody on the same page and create a sense of teamwork and set the right culture. So all those things have evolved. I started off as a team leader and did that for many years and went from team to team, and then got into a bigger, broader role once I got to the pilot in terms of being a narrative editor across the room and working as a DME, and then of course being a managing editor, you're running the day-to-day. So.
Okay. So you talk about learning from poor leaders and better leaders.
I've learned from the worst.
Yeah. What are some of the lessons that you learned from them?
I learned, and it's joking, but I think we've all had that experience. You learn sometimes from the people who don't do their jobs very well and the things that frustrate you as an employee. So my early bosses were not great communicators. Were people who didn't want to deal with personnel issues, were people who, I had one boss who, you'd go in to have a meeting with him and he would constantly stare at his watch or wait for the phone to ring because, he was waiting for an out, didn't really want to have those conversations. I learned very early on that a lot of times people got promoted who were very technically strong, but really struggled with people skills. They just had a hard time building relationships, and so much of what we do is about building relationships. Is about creating an environment where somebody they want to come to work and work for you because they understand what you're about and what you want out of them. And so I had a lot of bosses early on who just didn't help me. I didn't feel like I was getting better. I didn't feel like they really had an interest in developing me. They had an interest in getting whatever was right in front of us done, but not necessarily an interest in what might come later, or that this was part of, developing me for a career. So I was a reporter for 7 years. I don't really think I ever had an editor who helped me all that much grow as a writer, as a storyteller. Because really, the folks that I was working with were not that good at that. They could patch a story quickly, but that wasn't their expertise. And then I also thought, as managers, they didn't really help me grow as a person either, or what I was trying to accomplish. And then over the years, I've had varying degrees. I think I've had a lot of editors who are very disorganized, very undisciplined, and I don't consider myself an extremely anal person, but I think that people need to feel like the captain of the ship has their hands on the wheel, and that we know where we're going. And so some of that, I've tried to learn from all of that, and especially, honestly, as we've downsized everywhere, we have to be more disciplined than ever to get anything done. We have there's so fewer people in newsrooms. There's so much we're still trying to accomplish that you have to have some order around everything that you're doing, and it makes people feel better. I think to feel like the person that they're working for has got a handle on things.
Impression management.
Yes, which is just I've had some good bosses, of course, too, and I've had people who kind of agree with sort of like you and I have talked a lot about. Working at the pilot, I was working with Dennis Finley, who was the editor. We were of the same mind, I think, about communication and managing from in front and not behind, sort of explaining to folks, here's what we'd like to see done. Here's what we think success looks like. And, we want you to get there. Not the other way around where you're trying to push people somewhere and not giving them a clear idea of where you want to go.
Indeed, you talk a little bit about you talked a little bit about development and especially kind of the coaching voice that a manager has. And you'd also talked to me privately about you had coached Dennis a little bit. Quick disclaimer and disclosure: my students do know about Dennis, and we had a small online read and respond and react discussion about when Dennis was recently got some attention. So so they know about Dennis, at least one part of him. I think you could probably talk about diversity in management and the way you coach Dennis. Your two different styles, your two different very different ways of looking at the world. If you could talk about that a little bit.
When I was at the pilot, Dennis Finley, who had come up as a photographer, was like probably one of the few. You may know Martin. I'm not sure there is another one who rose to be an editor of a newspaper. There may be, but he was very unusual in that sense because people generally didn't come up from the visual side all the way to be the editor. Exactly. So obviously had great visual instincts. I'd worked a lot with the designers as well. I have a word background, so I think from that perspective, he thought we were well matched and that we're complementing each other. But personality-wise, too, we're just very different people. He's an extrovert. He's an introvert who likes being the center of attention of all things, and I'm actually an extrovert who doesn't really. I like being in the center of things, but I don't want to be the center of attention.
That's totally Pam, by the way. Pam is a strange a creature who's an extrovert, but a really hardcore homebody,
I really do like being in the middle of everything, but I don't need the camera on me, and he actually likes the camera on him. Yeah. So anyway, and to his great credit, I think that when he became an editor and he wanted a managing editor, he asked me to do it because he felt like we would really complement each other, and he wanted to pick somebody who was different from him, which I think is a lesson for all great managers because I think often we tend to gravitate toward the people who seem like us, who we connect with, and may or may not be the best, because I think a lot of times you do want somebody who's very different from you, who will push you, who will have a point of view on a lot of things. So to his credit, he did that, and then working together, as I've told you, and I know because Dennis has said this publicly, that it was really good for him because I'm not sure. He got into management the same way we all did, without much coaching. You're just thrown into it. I helped him, and the other members of his senior leadership team helped him, I think, to kind of figure out that his tendency to try to make a quick decision about everything wasn't always the right way. It was what he was used to. I think, quite honestly, it's the white guy approach. Like, there's a problem. We have to find a solution. Here's my answer to that problem. Well, not everybody approaches things the same way, and what that does is it shuts off all kinds of conversation. So we actually got Dennis to stop talking first. He would say, let's discuss something. Here's what I think. Well, then that would shut down all kinds of conversation, as opposed to, I'd like to hear what you all think, then I'll weigh in with what I think, and then we're more open to conversation. So he really came a long way. I'd say to you on the diversity front, and I hope your students are thinking that way coming up, and I think they probably are, because they're of a generation for whom diversity it's like breathing. I mean, this is what the world is. You expect and you want to be surrounded by different people. Newsrooms today are still very homogeneous. They tend to be led by men for the most part. They still tend to be led by white men for the most part. We somehow, even though more women are going to journalism school and have been for a long time, somehow we've managed to push them out or not keep them around, or not do enough to encourage them to stay. And so that's depressing to me, because I think we make better decisions when we have diverse people at the table. And in terms of management style, that's something I've always appreciated, and I thought makes me a better, smarter manager, is to draw in people to solve a problem, to think through an issue, to see how we're going to tackle something. It makes you smarter. It helps you understand things better. It helps you come to a better decision. Sometimes it takes more time, but I think it's worth it. And not everybody follows that line of thinking. As you know, some people much prefer the top-down, let me just decide what we're going to do.
Well,
but we work in a very creative business. We work in a business that there's a lot of adrenaline, there's a lot of stress. I think
at stake.
And there's a lot at stake, and it's important, I think, to have all these great minds come together. One of the things that Martin and I loved about working at the Pilot was that very thing, is that you could have a meeting and be surrounded by lots of brilliant people, lots of people smarter than me, and it's great to have them talking, because then you come to these, I think, better decisions. And to Dennis's credit, I think he really grew to get there, to see that was a better way. And in fact, in our later years, there were times when I was rushing to make a decision, and he would sort of slow me down and say, let's take some time here, because, you taught me to slow down. Let's slow down. So
nice. The collaborative.
I was going to say one thing. I don't know if we talked about covering, Martin, but I think is important as a manager is to have a sense for what kind of manager you want to be. What is it how do you define your own? What's success to you? You obviously have metrics that whatever place is going to put on you. There are things that the Tampa Bay Times expects of me now and expects of my team. But what is it for me? What are my personal goals too? I obviously have to succeed at what they want me to succeed at, but what do I think is important? And part of that for me goes beyond their goals. Part of that for me is, in my case, I want to see each of my reporters feel like they're doing really important work and feel like they keep getting better and stronger and more challenged, and like I'm helping them to grow. And so I think when you have a clear idea of what your purpose is and what you're trying to do, it makes it so much easier. And of course, you have to share that with everybody else. But I think a lot of managers fail to communicate and fail to talk about they talk in the weeds. They talk about what we need to do today or what we need to do 5 minutes from now, but they don't really think about the bigger, deeper issues that are going on and what people are struggling with or hoping to accomplish. And if you're never having those conversations, you're never going to get them to a better place.
So the collaborative culture, then, you've been at this point, especially recently, you have been in senior editing and management positions at 3 different news organizations, counting the Pilot and Houston and Tampa. You've seen differences in cultures. Some are more collaborative than others. The Pilot, as we know, was on that continuum a fairly collaborative culture. certainly the most collaborative I've experienced in the 3 markets that I've worked in. Tell me about your other experiences and how you adapted to those.
Houston was more was not as collaborative. It was more top down.
Traditional.
And I don't know. I think it was the editor's preference, her style. Much more introverted, much more wanted to work with her managing editor, and kind of we shoved a little bit and got more included, the other DME and I, but it was a smaller management group and not as much of all of us at the table, which personally is not the way I would do it and not what I would prefer, because like I said, I think that you end up, it's not that you make bad decisions, you might make good decisions, but you don't make decisions that are rooted in really, I think, a better understanding of what all is going on. No one person understands everything going on in one newsroom, and even, when we had a management team at the pilot of 7 people, quite often, we'd be discussing something and we'd be hearing things from different parts of the room via these individuals who were picking up stuff, and it was very helpful. Here again, there are 6 of us in senior management, and we meet once a week. We have a lot of discussion around what's going on in the room. Everybody shares things that they're dealing with. I think, it helps you to set some standards and to be fair across the room, that what's happening in one corner might also be happening somewhere else, and you can share information. So this is much more pilot-like here in terms of the collaboration. So for me, it feels more comfortable, feels more like home, because it's what I was used to and what I was sort of raised up on. It's also, though, what I enjoy. I mean, I enjoy that collaboration. I think that's one of the coolest things about journalism, is that it's a team sport. I've always loved that. I mean, even though we're individual, you were a photographer, I was a writer, you do your individual thing, but you know that you have all these people coming together to put your work, to put it the best package forward, and it's wonderful to work in that environment. So this is more like that, and I feel happier to have that again.
It is, and something I've noted with the class is that there are collaborative organizations. The pilot was certainly one. Still, however, I think the front line, the photographers, the writers, felt strong ownership of the work because of the byline. It's great quality control mechanism, but it makes you very internally and self-focused. There's that tension between a need for autonomy and really a very independently minded, free-spirited, autonomous culture, and also the need at a certain point to come together in a complex workflow and put out a meaningful product every day.
Right. Well, and I think to help each other too. I think I learn from other managers just as much as I learn from my reporters and photographers and people that I'm working with. I think you get to see how other people handle situations and what they do, and I just think we're all better when we're not working in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. So, talk a little bit about your own. We talked a little bit about diversity. We talked a little bit about gender. I'm wondering if, do you think, what are the differences that you see? What are the gifts that your gender perspective or your personal perspective with regard to diversity and heritage? What helps you? What do you see as a manager? How does that empower you to be an effective manager?
It's always, when you talk about gender and diversity in newsrooms and ethnicity, race, you don't want to stereotype. Mm-hmm. But, generally speaking, I think I found female managers to be a little more communicative, a little more relationship focused. And that's been the case for me. I mean, I feel like one of the things that I've always tried to do, and it's always been more effective to me, is to develop relationships with the people I'm working with, because to me it's about building trust, and you can't build that if you don't have those kind of relationships. So we all have different management styles. We all have different ways of doing things. And I remember years ago there was a American Society of Newspaper Editors had done a thing where they actually broke down the tendencies of white men and black women and Hispanic women, and they could say, like, okay, these are sort of the ways. This is why it's sometimes difficult to manage in a group, because people have certain tendencies that get in the way of each other. And I think the more that you have that kind of diversity, the harder it is to but you got to do it. You work together to sort of understand how each other works, and then you get better at it. I've had mostly male bosses for the years, so and I've had some really good ones who have been very thoughtful and been good listeners and good communicators. But I think it's nice. We had a time there at the pilot where we had a lot of up and coming young women going into the editing ranks, and it felt a little different. The climate was a little different. I think there was stronger support system for each other, maybe more than men were willing to ask each other for help and that kind of thing. I mean, so there are little things that sometimes play out like that. I'm really kind of disappointed that 30 years in, I'm sitting here still kind of walking into newsrooms where it doesn't look much different demographically than it did back in the 80s. And I think I think it's to our detriment, and I think it's a really dire situation moving forward into covering an America that doesn't anymore.
Okay.
I'm wandering now. I feel like I'm babbling on, but
That's okay.
I've really, from the start of my career, I've really tried to mentor, especially women and minorities. I have mentored men as well, but I have made it a real point to try to reach out and make sure that they feel heard, they feel like they have a champion, feel like someone who's paying attention, who can empower them to do bigger things in their careers. And I think everybody needs that. I mean, whoever you are, I think everybody needs that. And I think not having managers who can relate to you a little better has been part of the reason we've lost so many people. Aside from the layoffs, of course, which have been devastating. But
indeed. All right, so I want to go ahead and pause it right here. We are your connection is getting fairly bad. So I want to go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording for a moment, and I've also got to get to a 3 o'clock class.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to terminate this recording right now. Bye, everybody.